The story you're about to hear is a work of fiction. You won't find reports of it in financial news archives because the companies and characters are not real. But this tale has become a modern corporate legend for the powerful lesson it teaches about what happens when arrogance meets quiet power. It all starts with the sharp, shocking splash of red wine. In a ballroom buzzing with cheerful chatter, the sound cut through everything. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers, but it was quickly swallowed by a wave of cruel, knowing snickers. They thought he was a nobody, a charity case who'd wandered into their exclusive $800 million victory party. As the burgundy stain spread across the cheap fabric of his jacket, they laughed. The vice president, Tyler Vance, held the empty glass with a smug little flourish. The CEO, Richard Sterling, watched from a few feet away, a look of cold amusement in his eyes. They had no idea that the man they were humiliating was the one they were all there to impress. They couldn't possibly know that this single act of arrogance was about to cost them everything. In that moment, a quiet, unassuming man became the architect of an empire's downfall. How could they know the stain on his jacket would trigger the complete collapse of their own? Subscribe to see how this unfolds. So, how did we get to this disastrous moment? Let's rewind a few hours. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto hundreds of guests in tailored suits and designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, aged scotch, and triumphant greed. This was the celebration for the deal of the decade, an $800 million partnership between the aggressive Summit Industries and the silent, monolithic powerhouse Apex Global Corporation. For Summit, this wasn't just a deal, it was a coronation. At the center of it all were two men. First, Richard Sterling, the CEO of Summit Industries. Richard was a man carved from polished granite and quiet ruthlessness. He had a disarming charisma that charmed investors, but beneath it all lay a deep contempt for anyone he deemed beneath him. His piercing blue eyes didn't just see people, they assessed their value and their replaceability. For Richard, this deal was his legacy. Orbiting him was Tyler Vance, the executive VP. If Richard was the shark, Tyler was the remora, feeding on scraps of power and wielding his borrowed authority with gleeful cruelty. Earlier, he had berated a young waiter for a slight tremor in his hand, hissing, "This is an $800 million night. Straighten up or get out." Richard watched with a slight, approving nod. This was the culture at Summit Industries, a brutal shark tank where only the most aggressive survived. The fear on the faces of junior employees painted a clear picture of a deeply toxic environment. And then there was Arthur Bennett. In this sea of shimmering egos, Arthur was an island of quiet stillness. He stood near a column, just observing. His suit was simple, well worn, but clean. The other guests, if they noticed him at all, dismissed him instantly. They saw the plain suit, the lack of designer watch, and categorized him as insignificant, a nobody who'd slipped past security for a free meal. But Arthur Bennett didn't just belong in that world, he owned it. He was the sole, silent, and intensely private founder of Apex Global Corporation. The $800 million deal wasn't a partnership, it was an acquisition. Apex was absorbing Summit. Arthur had built his empire on two sacred principles, integrity and respect for every single person. For every major acquisition, he conducted what he called a cultural audit. He would anonymously insert himself into the company to see its true face. Tonight was his final test. He'd had a brief, polite exchange with a young analyst. Arthur noticed she looked overwhelmed and simply asked if she was enjoying the evening. His kind eyes put her at ease. "Don't be intimidated," Arthur had said softly. "Good work speaks for itself. The noise is just noise." The young woman's face lit up with gratitude. Tyler Vance saw this from across the room and scowled, seeing a senior analyst wasting time with a nobody. In his eyes, Arthur was a distraction, a piece of dust to be swept away. As the night wore on, the triumphant mood grew louder. Richard Sterling was finishing a round of backslapping photos, his smile a perfect corporate veneer. Arthur remained by his column, a silent observer who had now seen enough. The casual cruelty and palpable fear confirmed his deepest concerns. The soul of Summit Industries was rotten. That's when Tyler Vance, flushed with champagne and self-importance, decided to have some fun. He saw Arthur standing alone and saw an opportunity to perform. With a crony on each arm, he sauntered over. "Well, well, look what we have here," he began, his voice loud enough for others to turn and watch. "Still enjoying the free drinks? You must feel a little out of place. This is for the big leagues." Arthur just looked at him, his gaze calm. "I'm just here to observe," he replied evenly. This simple response seemed to infuriate Tyler. He expected fear, or at least a stammer. This quiet man's refusal to be intimidated was an insult. "Observe?" he chuckled, a nasty, grating sound. "Observing doesn't pay for a party like this, old man. Contribution does." He took a step closer, crowding Arthur's space, and snatched a full glass of red wine from a passing tray. "You know, some people just don't know their place." And then it happened. With a motion just a little too clumsy to be an accident, Tyler stumbled. "Whoops," he slurred, as the entire glass of Cabernet cascaded down the front of Arthur Bennett's jacket. First, gasps. Then, Tyler and his friends erupted in loud, braying laughter. Richard Sterling, watching from his armchair, didn't laugh, but a cruel, satisfied smirk settled on his face. He just watched a perfect, casual assertion of dominance. The crowd took their cue. Snickers and condescending whispers filled the ballroom. No one offered a napkin. They just watched. Arthur Bennett didn't flinch. He simply looked down at the spreading stain, then slowly lifted his head. He looked directly at Tyler, but the quiet observer was gone. In his place was something cold, ancient, and absolute. It was the look of a judge who had just passed sentence. In that moment, the $800 million deal was already dead. The ink on its death certificate was the wine soaking into a cheap suit. They just didn't know it yet. With a quiet dignity that only seemed to make Tyler angrier, Arthur murmured, "Excuse me," and headed for the restrooms. His composure was a foreign concept in this room of loud reactions, the deliberate retreat of a man who knew the battle was already won. The second Arthur was gone, Richard beckoned Tyler over. "Well done, Tyler," he purred. "A bit theatrical, but effective. This company is a shark tank, and tonight we proved we're the great whites." Tyler swelled with pride. He needed to learn his place, Richard. Their conversation quickly turned to the spoils of their victory. "As soon as the ink from Apex is dry, we initiate Project Streamline," Richard declared, his eyes gleaming. "We'll cut 20% of the workforce. Minimal severance. The acquisition gives us the perfect cover." "And our bonuses?" Tyler asked, his greed palpable. "Historic," Richard promised with a wolfish grin. "We also bury the Q3 financials. There's some creative accounting in there the Apex due diligence team somehow missed. Once that contract is signed, they can't do anything. We'll be untouchable." They clinked glasses, toasting their own corruption, clueless that the man they just humiliated was the one they were planning to deceive. Meanwhile, in the men's restroom, Arthur blotted the wine stain. The cheap jacket was ruined, but it had served its purpose. Looking in the mirror, he wasn't angry. He just felt a profound disappointment. He had hoped to find a core of decency in Summit, but it was hollow. He walked back out, the damp stain a stark emblem of the evening. He didn't return to the main floor, but lingered in the periphery, where a woman approached him. It was Victoria Sterling, Richard Sterling's estranged daughter, her face a mask of quiet disgust.
"I saw what they did," she whispered. "I'm so sorry."
That's who they are. Arthur saw a flicker of the integrity he'd been looking for. "It's not your apology to give," he said gently. Victoria's composure cracked. "It's worse than you know," she confessed, her voice trembling. "It's criminal. The books are cooked. My father has been hiding losses for years. This deal, it's a life raft to hide the hole in the ship before it sinks." She leaned closer. "There was a fire last month in the accounting department. They called it an electrical fault, but it destroyed all the physical records. I know he was behind it. But they weren't as thorough as they thought. I have a friend, a bookkeeper my father fired. Before he left, he backed everything up. I have it all on a drive." Arthur listened, his calm observation hardening into a cold, determined resolve. This went far beyond a toxic culture. This was fraud, arson. His quiet cultural audit had just stumbled upon a full-blown criminal conspiracy, and he, Arthur Bennett, was now the only one who could stop it. The moment of ceremony finally arrived. Richard Sterling ascended the stage to thunderous applause, beaming under the spotlights. "Thank you," he began, his voice booming with charisma. "Tonight we celebrate a vision. This $800 million partnership with the esteemed Apex Global Corporation is the dawn of a new era for Summit Industries." He gave a smirking shout-out to his loyal pit bull, Tyler Vance, who beamed from the front row. "Tyler knows you have to do what's necessary to protect the brand." Finally, he reached the crescendo. "And now, it is my great honor to invite the visionary, if famously reclusive, leader of Apex Global Corporation to the stage to sign the contract." A spotlight swept the room. The crowd craned their necks, buzzing with anticipation. Who was this mysterious titan of industry? Then, from the shadows, a figure began to move. It was Arthur Bennett. He walked calmly toward the stage. Security guards moved to intercept the man in the wine-stained suit. "Sir," said one, "this area is for board members only." Arthur didn't break stride. "That's quite all right," he said, with an authority that made the guard instinctively step aside. Arthur walked up the stairs and stood right next to a dumbfounded Richard Sterling. Confused silence washed over the room. Tyler Vance started to laugh, but it died in his throat when he saw the look on Arthur's face, a look of absolute, unshakable power. Richard leaned in and whispered furiously, "What in God's name are you doing? Get off my stage!" Arthur ignored him and stepped to the microphone. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm, but carrying an immense weight. "My name is Arthur Bennett." He paused, then looked directly at the CEO. "Mr. Sterling, you were looking for the leader of Apex Global Corporation. I'm afraid you've been looking in all the wrong places." He turned back to the mic. "You see, I am Arthur Bennett, the founder, the sole owner, and the chief executive officer of Apex Global." A collective, audible gasp sucked the air from the room. Richard's face turned a ghastly, waxy white. His jaw hung open. In the front row, Tyler Vance looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his face a mask of pure horror. Arthur continued, "I have a tradition. Before I acquire any company, I need to understand its character. You can't find a company's soul on a balance sheet. So I came here tonight to see yours." His eyes found Tyler, and what I saw was revealing. He recounted the bullied waiter, the fear-filled culture, the pervasive arrogance. Then he gestured to the ugly stain on his jacket. And then, of course, there was this. A small thing, really. But we all know it wasn't about the wine, was it, Mr. Vance? It was about cruelty for sport. It was about showing a nobody his place. He turned his gaze back to Richard.
You said you run a shark tank, Mr. Sterling. You're mistaken. Sharks are noble predators. You are parasites, feeding on good people to create nothing but fear. He stepped to the table where the nearly billion-dollar contract lay. This deal, he announced, his voice ringing with finality, was contingent on one non-negotiable term: integrity, a currency in which this company is utterly bankrupt. Arthur picked up the thick-bound contract. Instead of signing it, he looked into the terrified eyes of Richard and Tyler. "The deal," he said, each word a hammer blow, "is off." Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he tore the contract in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed like a gunshot. He tore it again and again, letting the pieces of their shattered future flutter to the floor. But he wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the small black USB drive, and placed it on the podium. "This," he said, "is a copy of this company's real financial records, provided by a concerned party. It details accounting fraud, insider trading, and other irregularities. And as for that convenient fire, I find that arson investigators are remarkably thorough people." Without another word, Arthur Bennett turned and walked off the stage, leaving a storm of chaos in his wake. The moment Arthur left the stage, the stunned silence shattered into panic. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing at the horrifying scene. Richard Sterling stood frozen, a statue of a man watching his world burn. Tyler Vance had physically collapsed into a chair, his body trembling. Investors and board members were already on their phones, furiously typing. They were dumping stock. They were calling lawyers. They were severing all ties to a ship that had just been spectacularly torpedoed in front of the entire world. Now, in the real world, a market collapse and federal investigation take months, even years. But in this story, karma is a little more immediate. The stock, propped up by lies, didn't just fall. It evaporated, entering a death spiral from which it would never recover. Arthur walked through the pandemonium as if in the eye of a hurricane, a pocket of perfect calm. He didn't look back. As he reached the revolving doors, Victoria Sterling stepped out from behind a pillar. Her face was pale, but the sadness in her eyes was gone, replaced by relief. "You did the right thing," she said. Arthur gave a slight nod. "Justice," he replied softly, "is its own reward." And then he walked out into the cool night air, leaving the smoldering ruins of Summit Industries behind. In this telling, the consequences were as swift as they were brutal. By the next morning, the gleaming headquarters of Summit Industries were being swarmed by investigators. Richard Sterling and Tyler Vance were led from their mansions in handcuffs later that week, their expensive suits a pathetic contrast to the cold steel around their wrists. Their empire, built on cruelty, crumbled to dust. The company was delisted, declared bankrupt, and dismantled. Richard and Tyler faced a litany of federal charges, losing their fortunes, their reputations, and their freedom. Their public disgrace became the cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. In stark contrast, Arthur Bennett's company Apex Global continued to thrive. He had surgically removed a cancer. He quietly absorbed the talented and ethical fragments of the fallen Summit empire, offering a new home to people like the young analyst he'd spoken to, and promoting the loyal bookkeeper who had helped Victoria. Arthur proved that ethics and success aren't mutually exclusive, that true, lasting success can only be built on a foundation of character. And so the legend of the wine-stained jacket was born. A fictional story, yes, but one told to remind ambitious executives to treat every single person with dignity. It's a reminder that true power isn't your title or your bank account. It's how you treat people when you think no one of consequence is watching, because you never, ever know who you're talking to. What did you think of Arthur's brand of justice? Was it justified, or was it just as ruthless as the men he took down? Let us know what you would have done in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of pride, downfall, and ultimate vindication.